everybody, welcome back to Furniture Flipping Teacher. I'm Lauren, and in this video we are going to be making over this herringbone coffee table. I typically don't pick up just single coffee tables and flip them, and there's a couple of reasons why, and one is because the amount of money that you can get with coffee tables isn't necessarily a lot compared to, the amount of money that you may be able to get for a dresser. And yes, a dresser is going to be a little bit more work to flip, but the return is just a little bit better in my opinion and in my area. If coffee tables are priced right though, and they have a good style, sometimes it's fun to switch it up and do some quick projects to get kind of the flip going. The flip, I like to call it like the itch to flip, because I have actually been out of town for the past 3 weeks and I am so ready to get back into flipping. So when I saw this herringbone style pattern on the top of this coffee table, I knew it had potential. And while it is in fairly good condition, it has seen some wear and tear. There are some watermarks on the top, so I'm ready to give this thing a nice new look. All right, as always, I like to start with a fresh slate. So I am going to be cleaning with Lily Moon's Furniture Prep. If you haven't heard me talking about this, it is a great cleaner because you can eliminate the step of rinsing the residue from the cleaner, because this is a non-residue cleaner. It's not going to leave anything behind. So once you've got it clean, you're good to move on to the next step. I ended up picking this up at a thrift store just last week, and if you haven't seen that video, definitely go ahead and check it out. We were thrifting in another city just a couple of hours from us, and we had a good time thrifting. I got this for just $20. This is definitely a dirty guy. All right, I think we are nice and clean now. I am going to get out my Surf Prep sander and get to sanding on the top here. All right, so instead of starting with my sander, I decided that I am going to use my carbide scraper, and I think that this is going to just help me get the first layer of finish off. I'm pretty confident that this is kind of a veneer finish on the top here, and since it's the beautiful herringbone, I don't want to sand through that, so I'm gonna take my time, just do a light coat or a light swipe with my carbide scraper, and then try and get that finish off. This is a great tool for stripping finishes that are really tough, or for kind of getting through some finish if you have thin veneer. But the one thing is, you don't want to push down too hard when you have veneer, or really anytime you're using this, because it can really gouge the top. So you just want to go nice and light, and you want to go with the wood grain, and it'll just start to remove some of that finish so that it's going to be a little bit less of a sanding job. So even with the herringbone, I am taking my time, and I'm gonna try and go like with the direction of each herringbone. So I'm gonna go this way, this way, this way, this way. Okay, so I've got a 120 grit and a 220 grit sandpaper here. And now that I've got the carbide scraper step out of the way, sanding should be a lot easier. But again, I don't want to go too fast and bust through that veneer. So I think I'm going to start with a 220 just to kind of see how well it gets through. If that's not enough, then I may have to switch to a 120 and then just be even more careful. So now that I've got the top all sanded down, I want to go ahead and scuff sand the bottom parts, the legs, because I'm going to be painting those so that we kind of have a contrasting between the stain and the legs. So what I'm going to do is prop it up here on my table so that it's a little bit easier for me to reach. I think actually I'm going to flip it over on the top so that way I can even reach it better. But since I already sanded the top down and the table is kind of crusty, I'm gonna put a blanket down first. Okay, and then I've got a 120 grit sandpaper here, and we're just gonna roughen up all of the legs and this little skirting around here so that that primer and paint will really adhere nicely. So I got everything scuff sanded, and the more I think about it, the more I'm sort of leaning toward actually sanding the legs and the skirting down to the raw wood, just like I did on the top, and just restaining the entire thing. I was looking at some inspiration just to see kind of like what paint color I wanted to use for the bottom of it, and I'm just looking, and like the modern coffee tables are kind of starting to just be all wood. So I figured, why don't I just restain it to a little bit of a more desirable color, because that was a pretty golden oaky tone and definitely screamed the, 1980s, 1990s, but it's still a really cool shape. So I think if I maybe just changed the color of the wood tone, we could be in good business for resale. And really, the sanding of the legs and the skirting boards is about 50% done already just from the scuff sanding, because the finish just wasn't hard to get through. So I think we're gonna switch gears a little bit, and instead of painting the bottom, we're gonna stain it to match the top, whatever stain color I choose. I think I'm gonna remove these legs just so that I can make sure and get into all of the cracks, make sure everything is really nicely sanded down before I stain the entire table. Flexibility in furniture flips, that'll get you far. All right, we're on the home stretch. I just got the rest of this sanded all down, so we are all good to go on the staining of this piece. I just sanded with a 120 grit. I might smooth out just a little bit with a 220 just to make sure I don't have any sanding swirls, and then I'm gonna show you what stain I'm gonna use. All right, it's time to apply some stain. I've got some BEHR wood stain, and it's a water-based. I decided to go with the color Special Walnut. I had actually picked this up, I don't know, a month or two ago. I was gonna use it on a different project, but I ended up not liking it, so I scratched it, but I still have it on hand. This little can is about 8 ounces, and it costs only $10. So we're only in at $20 with the table, $10 with the stain, which I probably won't even use all of. And then, the other materials like cleaning supplies and sandpaper. And then the other supply that I will need to use is a top coat, because this does not have a built-in top coat. I'm gonna just pour it into this separate container because I'm gonna be applying it with this blue sponge here. Since it's a water-based stain, instead of a pre-stain, you can use water to help it soak up better. So I just like to mist my sponge a little bit, and then I'll dip it into my stain and then apply it as I go, and I'll kind of just rub it in. I won't really be wiping anything back this time. Kind of depends on what look you want to achieve. If you don't want it to be too dark, then you could definitely wipe it back. But otherwise, just kind of go with the flow and put it on. You can always do multiple coats as well. Just want to make sure that you go with the wood grain. Okay, everything dried on the first little round of stain on the skirting that I did, and it wasn't quite dark as I wanted it to be. So I just did a light coat around the whole thing one more time. And now I am getting ready to do the legs. And I was like, I don't want to do it just one side at a time, because usually if there's corners and stuff, it'll go around the corners, and then it'll get darker in those spots if you go over it, a different amount of times than you go over the rest of the surface. So I have seen this trick before where you take a clamp like so, and then you basically clamp it to the nail or the screw that is a part of the leg where it attaches from. And if you can do that, then it'll stand up like that. And then you can do the whole thing and it will dry all together at the same time with no weird lines or darker spots anywhere. So I got a little frustrated and I didn't record what I just did, but basically I sanded off the stain that I put on the top because I just can't get it to not be streaky. I say so many times with stain and paint wash and things like that, that you want to go in the direction of the wood grain. And this basically has, you know, 6 directions of the wood grain because we've got the herringbone going diagonal this way and diagonal this way. That's 2 directions. And then you've got the long pieces going side to side this way and this way. And then you've got the up and down pieces. I guess it's 4 directions, but it is so difficult to get it all going the same direction. When I rub this way, then it gets on that side and then it gets on that. It's just been a big headache. I've tried it twice now, sanding off and trying again, and it's still so streaky. So I've resorted to what I really didn't want to do because it's going to be pretty time consuming, especially in the herringbone areas, which is to tape off my areas, stain it, and then peel it back and tape off the other areas so that I can get a nice even finish where it doesn't have streaks across wood grains. So I'm gonna be taping for the next little while here, but good news is my idea is gonna work. It's just gonna be a little bit more time consuming than I was hoping in the beginning when I started this project, but aren't they all? Right. Overall, I'm very impressed with the table, although it took me a bit longer, actually like days longer than I had originally planned to spend on this table, but I took the time and taped everything off, and now everything looks like it should. I love the new tone of wood. You can still really see the herringbone pattern in it. So now all that's left is to reattach the legs and then give this thing a top coat for protection. Okay, so just flipping it back over, and I labeled where the legs need to go back just so that it's back in the same spot. And I'm just gonna go ahead and reattach those with the screws or the nuts and bolts and that jazz. Top coat time. For top coat, I'm gonna be using a satin clear coat. Generally, I like to spray my top coat, even if I brushed on, oh gosh. Yikes. Oopsies. Generally, I like to spray my top coat even if I have brushed on or stained something, because it's just gonna help you get the best flawless finish with the top coat. And plus, I don't want to deal with the streaks that could occur again if I drag it across the top and the herringbone, but the spraying of it will help it self-level and it won't cause any streaking marks. So I'm gonna get this loaded up here in my Wagner Flexio 5000, and you always wanna strain your paint, your primer, or your top coat through a strainer here just to make sure that you're getting out all of the chunks so that it doesn't clog up your sprayer and you have to stop mid-spray. I don't need too much top coat since this is just a smaller coffee table. I will be doing at least 2 or 3 coats of it because, you know, generally on a coffee table, people are setting drinks and food and things like that. So I want it to be super durable. But of course, I'll also still recommend whoever buys it to use coasters and things like that because it's not indestructible, but it's going to be similar to a normal coffee table in the end. So let's do it. All right, the coffee table is done. It will never, ever, ever cease to amaze me how long some projects just end up taking. I always think that I am going to be finished with a project way sooner than I ever am. So I wish that I would just start learning that projects are really gonna take longer than I ever anticipate them to. But all in all, I'm really pleased with the way that this coffee table turned out. I'm so glad I was able to get that golden oak tone out of it. And I'm honestly really pleased that I decided to go with no paint and only stain on this piece. I think that the darker stain actually it complements the oak wood grain really, really well because in oak, there is like a darker wood grain in the wood. And so when you have a darker stain, it's gonna, you know, darken up the wood around the darker points, but then it's going to even deepen the darkness in those darker pockets of wood grain. If that made any sense to you, I don't know, but moral of this story is I'm really pleased with the way that this turned out. I'm glad that I took the time to tape off the herringbone pattern and keep that because after all, that was the reason that I was really drawn to this table in the first place. So I'm gonna be listing it on Facebook Marketplace for probably around like $220, $225-ish. It's a solid wood table. I mean, I sanded this thing a ton. I really thought that this was veneer. But if it is a veneer, it's like a thicker veneer and I didn't bust through it at all. So it's a solid wood table, it's vintage, it's gonna last for a really long time. I did like 3 or 4 top coats on it, so the top is really, really durable. If you're interested in when this baby sells, make sure you are following me over on Instagram at Furniture Flipping Teacher, and we will update you over there once this thing sells. And I'll also try to update you in a upcoming video once this table is sold. But I just also want to remind you that not every project has to be a huge project. You don't have to go and get a 4-piece furniture set. You don't have to even start with a dresser. Smaller flips like these still take some time and energy. So even flipping smaller things, if maybe you still have a full-time job and you just want to get into a hobby but yet still make some extra money on the side, it doesn't always have to be you swinging for the fences on the biggest project ever. I hope you guys enjoyed this flip and thanks for following along. We'll see you next week and I'll see you on the flip side.